Welcome to the Gestalt Get-Together, presented by Speech Therapy PD. This is your podcast for discussing the profile of Gestalt language processing, sharing experiences of raising, working with, and being a Gestalt processor, and identifying ready-to-use therapy techniques that are actually working in homes, schools, and clinics. I'm Corinne Zmoos, MS CCC-SLP, a musical speech therapist who studies the intersection of musicality, Gestalt processing, and play integrations in autistic children. In this podcast, I eagerly pull from the research and enthusiastically center lived experiences with what I hope to be curiosity, humor, and an open willingness to be wrong. Listeners of the GGT, like you, are learning about the whys, the whats, and the hows that are helping Gestalt language processors and their families achieve their goals. Welcome back to the Gestalt Get-Together. My guest on this episode is someone I've been wanting to speak to for quite a while. I've just been so excited to pick your brain a little bit more, especially about today's topic. We're going to be talking about the connection between jazz and language. But first, before we get to that, who are you?
Sure. Well, I feel the same way. I'm so stoked to talk to you, Corinne. My name's Garrett. I've always, been really into music and language and what comes out of the auditory sonic experience of our world. But my background is in first jazz guitar performance, and then in speech therapy. And I'm currently a PhD student at UCLA, and I'm researching, broadly speaking, language development, infant vocalizations.
Tell me more about the infant vocalizations. I know that's not really what we're going to be talking about today, but yeah. I'm an early interventionist. Like, that is where I really shine. So when you say Beautiful. That, it catches my attention. Tell me more. Okay.
Well, maybe I can. This is like something that I was going to talk about later, but
great.
So basically, I think of one big connection, right, that we don't often think about, because I think people tend to think of speech and language as being this like sort of magical, just like emerges, but it in fact is a highly practiced motor skill, like in when you're learning to play the guitar in jazz or whatever, in the mandolin, ukulele, whatever it might be. And so if you've ever seen infants babble, that's like essentially motor practice right there. They're exploring and mastering the sonic space and how to, different muscle activations. There's like 100 different muscles that you have to coordinate to, make speech sounds. And so they're exploring the aspects of the space, seeing how they affect things in the world. And then, like this process follows these like particular stages. And so my PI's PI was someone I interviewed on a podcast recently, but Kim Aller, who was the first researcher to characterize the stages of babbling. So if you've ever heard of,
Really?
Canonical babbling or like reduplicated babbling, he did that. He was the person that found these stages. But prior to that, they had tried to like, write out infant babble. And they had all these crazy ideas about it, because what they're trying to do is they're shoehorning what we heard as adults into these adult categories, when that's not what infants were doing. They're not actually making these adult-like sounds in the beginning. They're like these sounds that float between categories. It's almost like you start with this sculpture and then you chip away at it until you can make it like more, something that looks like a shape. So, and in any case, he instead of trying to categorize babble in the way that we might write out IPA or something like that, he characterized these stages of babbling that occur. So, he had a large effect on how we think about babbling today.
Wow. You're already lighting up so many different directions I want to go in. It's when I think about the way you just talked about babbling, it's almost like a child's discovery that they are the instrument. And figuring out, how do all of these tubes and like all the ways of compressing myself as instrument, the cause and effect relationships there, which is such a cool way to think about the human body.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's really amazing. I said speech is not magical. It is. I think it is magical, but in a different way than we think.
Yes.
So one thing I'm actually researching, so I'm not going to, give away. So I don't really know. I think this is sort of an open question in the field, but it seems like, and I think that there's some computational evidence to suggest this, that infants are intrinsically motivated in the beginning of their life to master their vocal apparatus. So like something like when you learn to use your arm, like, so this is from something called dynamic systems theory, but an infant will basically not know how to move their arm, and they want to be able to grab stuff and reach for stuff and master how their arm moves in space. But if you track the patterns in the beginning, they go all over the place, and until they finally get the whatever object is the cup maybe they're trying to grab, and then they can start to do that over and over again. So it is this sort of like, it's a little bit a random process, and it converges on what they're trying to do based on their goal and this like intrinsic motivation to master their body. And so I think a similar thing is happening in the vocal domain. And there's this really awesome paper where this French computational scientist was able to computationally model all the stages of babbling, just based on one drive of maximizing the competence progress. So they just put in this one single drive and they built like this computational version of like a vocal tract. And they saw how just that drive to maximize competence progress like created these stages of babbling. It was really, really cool. And so I think that it's something that we might be able to see we're gathering this like vocalization and physiological data. So like looking at arousal and heart rate and things like that. So hopefully it's something we can find in that signal.
To be able to use all these different variables in ways of like all these different lenses and perspectives to think about this thing that a lot of people take for granted. I would say, babies make these sounds, but to go deeper and deeper and deeper to better understand it and not just take it for granted. I'm blown away by the ideas that people have for how to study these phenomena.
Sorry, I'm just adding on one thing. Like the reason I think that we think about, speech and language as being more magical, whereas something like learning the mandolin, we think of that as a skill, is because we don't see it like that practice is like invisible to us, but like each time, so if the infant vocalizes 200, 300 times a day, I think it's more than that. It's like hundreds of times a day.
Sure.
That's like practice with the instrument every day for years and years, and then that scales up as you master things. You get better at chunking larger elements of that to the point where now when we're having a conversation, we are like master jazz musicians, like improvising. So all that practice, I think, is really happening. And you reach the 10,000 hour rule like really fast in the vocal domain. Yeah. So I think that's one reason that we don't think of speech and language as a highly practiced motor skill, but it totally is.
Sure. And like kind of like an emotional thing for me, I'm having an emotional reaction thinking about how all of those experiences at us as infants made it possible for us to do this now. It's kind of a beautiful thing to think about. You mentioned jazz. Before we get to that, I do want to comment on most people who listen to my podcast, they're thinking about autism every day. And there's really interesting papers about the early vocalizations of children who are later identified as autistic. We do see some differences there. In amount and the quality. And there is one paper I do want to reference. I'm not going to go deep into it, but I always like to give people a place to go next. It's a 2024 paper called Acoustic Features of Vocalizations in Typically Developing and Autistic Infants in the First Year. It's by Aller et al.
So Aller is the person I mentioned.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Cool. Perfect. There it is.
I interviewed him, a few weeks ago, and he's my PI's PI. So
got it. I didn't even make the connection between it. I didn't make the connection between reading his name and hearing it. I love it. That makes me so happy. But anyone who's listening, you probably already wrote down a note for that name, but that paper in particular, if you want to zoom into autistic or infant vocalizations of children who are later identified as autistic, that could be a place to start. Okay, let's talk about jazz. Why are we talking about jazz?
Okay, so, I've been thinking about all this. So usually when I come on or when I am talking about music and speech therapy, it's been for the longest time, I'm thinking about music as like an intervention tool for speech therapy, but this is like different. I'm now thinking about music, and I think this is so important, so cool. Like the more I've thought of it, and we were just talking about this before, but like the way that you can use music as a lens to kind of see, speech therapy in a new way. I don't know that maybe there's a better way to say that, but I'm thinking about music as basically a lens for looking at speech rehabilitation in a way that we typically tend to gloss over, but I think are really, really important points. And so in jazz, like there's so many connections there. But one thing is that I'm going to start with like kind of getting back to practice, like because it's a highly, speech is a motor skill. Practice is really, really important. But any jazz musician will tell you that like some practice is better than others. So like, and you probably know this too, right? Like, that you can practice really effectively and you could practice like not so effectively. Like there are big periods of my life where I would just like play like the thing I knew over and over and over again, and consider that practice, even things like running scales and stuff can be problematic. So one way of thinking about speech is understanding what makes good like jazz practice and bad jazz practice. So one thing is like decontextualized practice is actually not that helpful. So imagine you want to play a riff, right? Like I want to play some riff from a song that I heard, it's a, I don't know, Herbie Hancock solo, and I'm like trying to play on guitar. And I keep messing up on the A note. If I practice the A note over and over and over again, it's not helpful. It lacks the context in that realm, right? So that's one example of like how maybe drilling like a certain sound or drilling an abstract feature is not that helpful without the context, right? So there's kind of how you could see the entry point of here, like why is like some practice better than others. Even like running scales, like if you never apply them to a song, running scales does not equal music. In the same way that learning certain sounds doesn't equal speech. Fluency emerges from actually practice sequences that are in the context of music, of a song. And so if you can never get to that place where you're getting into a song or generalizing into a song, you're actually not just going to be able to do that by virtue of practicing that one single note over and over again. And you can kind of see this like, sorry, go ahead.
No. Yeah. I was thinking about when you say within the context, I mean, that reminds me of this idea of Gestalt, right? Where the song is the container for those skills to emerge, for the recognition of meaning, and for that development to happen. Where if for a kid who appears to learn through that greater whole, language and language play within that wider container is where I really see progress happen, rather than just say go, say up, or really like drilling or teaching a single word. Whereas we think about like the song or the Gestalt, the meaning of it and the skill with it is embedded within the feeling that container engenders. So it's within the context, it's within the body's experience of what go feels like, or the body's experience of what these words mean within that wider whole of the song.
Amazing. Yeah. So that's one thing that I was also going to get to. Okay. All these points are so,
I know.
All these points are so overlapping.
They overlap. It's so hard. I know.
So I want to just jump here and there, and there's so many cool things to talk about. But yeah, so exactly. So when we encode any bit of language, we encode a ton of context with it. So, and this comes from something in psycholinguistics called the exemplar model. But basically what we're doing is we don't have a dictionary definition and then apply a bunch of rules to that definition, or a prototypical sound. Like we don't have one P sound in our head. We don't have like a bilabial plosive, unvoiced bilabial plosive category in our head. We actually have like a bunch of variation around that, and we have a cloud of exemplars that are tied to very specific contexts that involve the person who said it, the sounds around it, the sentence that it's in, the semantic context, the social context, the cultural context. All of that. It's all kind of being encoded in when we process that sound. So you can't really abstracting it from that is actually not the right way, not the right way that we should be thinking about it. Like you're saying, when we teach some of these sounds, it's really, really important to understand that, I guess in some cases there might be an issue with making that sound, but a lot of times it's tied to like a particular context. So that's why working with carrier phrases with like a target sound, where you have like a situation in the real world where you're practicing, like, I don't know, if you're going to go to the park and the child is saying like, let's go instead of let's go. Like you want to practice in the situation where like they say, let's go. And then you go to the park, it's like a real world functional context. And then they're getting the excitement of, oh, we're going to this park. It's like all of this stuff is all tied together very intimately.
Yeah, when I'm talking to families about this early language acquisition, receptively, starting with that of what do these words even mean, but then also the ability to express it within the context. The first I talk about often is that, the way that these sounds combine to make a word is pretty arbitrary, except for like onomatopoeia. These words are something that we decided on a long, long, long time ago. But maybe arguably like mama, dada, papa, baba, kids chose those names for us, but that's a whole different conversation. But so much of these sounds combinations are arbitrary. And so thinking about, we have to tie it to a context that, when I think about, like, I talk about embodied cognition a lot, but let's go, attaching go to the feeling of, in that context of that forward momentum. When my body is moving or when I witness something in motion, that arbitrary combination of go, that is attached to that feeling or witnessing that motion. So it's how can we combine all of this? I'm saying exactly what you said in just a different way, because I'm very, very excited right now.
You mentioned something really cool about like kind of arbitrariness. Yeah. And what that kind of also highlights is the importance of input. Because we learn in the context of a social cultural history that has deemed certain, that these words mean these things. We have a shared meaning between a bunch of people in a culture. So I was making this point that we don't actually have these dictionary definitions and then apply these rules. What we actually have is a culture that has made certain like forms more relevant, and then those get reused. We actually need the more specific cultural instantiations of the phrases. And so that's why input is so important. This is another connection to jazz, because when I started playing jazz, I was terrible. It took me so long to understand jazz because I started trying to go from the rules. Like I learned it in school. It wasn't something that I actually listened to a ton growing up. I was more into like funk and rock and fusion and these kinds of things. So I was like trying to make up my own lines from the rules that I had, like combine these scales. But that's not actually, that's a misconception of jazz and improvisation in general, is that you start from rules and then make something. You actually have to get a bunch of input. I had to listen to a lot of jazz, understand the like norms and the like the sorts of riffs that they played and like all that kind of stuff. And then you take those like chunks and you recombine them, and then like that becomes improvisation. So
there's that
you
word,
can see
chunks,
there's that Gestalt connection right there.
There
But
it is. Yeah.
we have a bunch of input, and from a particular social cultural context that we live in, and we use those forms in like, based on like you're saying, in the embodied situation that we're in, like in those contexts that we're in, we know when to use particular forms because we've encoded all of that. Like there's like an amazing magical thing about speech and language. But when we learn speech and language, it's like all that context and that rich stuff is all there with it. Yeah.
You're making me think about my songwriting process, where so I'm a songwriter, and there's ways to write a song. There's rhyme schemes and there's rules that you can follow about structurally how to write lyrics. The way that I have become, this is not going to sound humble, but the way I've become a really good songwriter is by listening to enough lyricism where there was experimentation that created feelings in me that I wanted to replicate and iterate on top of. Hearing music, hearing lyricism where my body had a reaction of, I have to iterate upon this. But I never would have gotten to those lyrics if I wasn't immersing myself in the creations of others and the way that they were combining words, the way that they were breaking rules and rhyme schemes and structuring the way that words emerge as time progresses. That's what has led me to be able to become a songwriter, not, oh, this word goes here because then the rhyme happens here and the timing there. So I completely relate on the songwriting side of it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it is also helpful to, you can go in after you've like sort of gotten a deep embodied sense of these patterns.
Yeah.
You can also analyze them. And I think that helps you, right? Like, I think it always goes both ways in a sense, but I think we start from that input, from that, sort of learning from what is actually there. I mean, all the way down to, the phonemes that we find important for the language. It starts from learning the statistical regularities of a speech stream, and picking up on those patterns.
There's such a recursive nature of all of this, where then like once you like acquire the bigger, that gestalt or that chunk, then exactly go back to the analysis, and then the analysis can inform. Yeah, it's all these cool loops.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I like that word, recursion.
Yeah, I think I took that from, I believe it was Dan Siegel, The Developing Mind. I think that's where I pulled that from.
Another way that there's like kind of this big link between, music and jazz and speech and language is just the conversation element. So kind of like I was saying before, we are engaged in this like improvisation all the time. So in jazz, like I think that becomes like when you go through the process of like learning jazz and learning that, here's how you improv and like all of that, it makes you think about what a complex, amazingly, structured thing we're doing without thinking about it. And that goes into all the, stuff we were talking about in development, all that practice, all the hours that you need to learn patterns across different, examples. And so in jazz, in the same way, you have these like elements of it that are made up. But I think, like I was saying before, one misconception is that you you make up whatever you want. Like that's not really the case. So I mentioned chunks for like a second ago. We are actually, just like in jazz, you actually have to take these riffs that you learn, and then you can recombine them in a bunch of ways. But it's a lot of recombining elements that you know already. It's not like really bottom up, like note by note doing something. You take these larger patterns And that is the only way that you can like fluently create lines. And that's the only way that we fluently, can talk, is that we have to think and learn in larger patterns and larger chunks. And so like we do this, I think, really, really without thinking about it. But in music, when you have to break it down, it's like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. Like, so I like have to store this multi-note chunk, and in English, or like in language, I'm going to, learn these phrases like I'm going to, or we want to, or, all these like little carrier phrases that we use all the time. When we're talking, we're actually talking in these like kind of larger little patterns that get strung together. And, we're not going sound by sound, or something like that. We have to use these larger chunks for fluency. So.
And I think, sometimes when there's two directions I want to go here. When I think about the improvisational nature of, a lot of language interactions where like you and I didn't write every single line that we're saying right now. In fact, I didn't write a single line of any of the conversational turns we're having right now. I'm pulling from certain constraints of topic constraints, but I also think about vocalizations, like utterances, expressive language. Even though there's that improvisational nature, it is fitting within physiological constraints, grammatical, cultural, psychoacoustic, right? There are constraints there, but within the containers of those, that's where the play can happen. So I think sometimes when I'm talking about everything you just said reminds me so much of my sessions with Gestalt processors who are kind of moving into that stage of play of, oh, this can go here, these mini chunks can all go together. I'll get feedback from families or from other therapists I'm mentoring of like, okay, but like, what do I say and how? And I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know what that kid is going to say next. It's that iterative process between us where there's certain constraints of what I could say next. But it's that riffing that happens where I see the most growth. It's not, ooh, in 3 turns, I'm going to say this phrase because I know that it'll lead to the acquisition of this verb. I don't know what that third turn from that kid is going to be. So it's about being in the moment and being present for what comes out from them. Do you feel like I might be jumping around? But you know what? We're just going to keep jumping here, Garrett. Do you feel like in an interaction with other jazz musicians, you have to be kind of that same level of attuned and present to be able to respond to what they do musically?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, listening is one of the like most essential components. Like, yeah. So
okay.
I think that, yeah, it's like a flow state that you can get into, right? Like, yeah. This is also on the edge of what I understand about all of this stuff too. So I don't really know, like, I don't know. There's something so magical about conversation, right? Like, like you can converge on something, you diverge. There's this paper I read recently actually about, you tend to think that convergence is what you want in a conversation, but they used FNIRS, which is like a sort of like you track blood flow in the brain for what people are doing in real time. I think there's a bit more of like you can track the time scales a little bit better with FNIRS than fMRI.
Wow. Okay.
But they looked at like brain patterns of people in these like scanners talking to each other, like having conversations. And the best conversations actually diverged. So they started out with convergence, but the best conversations actually like kind of diverged a little bit. I think what that means to me is that like there's a bit of an exploratory element, an exciting element, and part of it that's like beyond what you know and understand and can expect, and like all of that is like where breakthroughs happen, because conversations are also about how you explore knowledge space with other people. Like you're both like explorers on this journey together, and you're like trying to get a little bit farther than you've been before. And you're like taking step by step within constraints, obviously. But like, I think that's what's often exciting about conversation. It's hard to like, quantify that like in a kind of speech therapy sort of way that we always try to do, like oh, we need to have a good conversation this way, like a lot of it is they're all these subtle cues that you pick up on. You have to listen, and I think those skills are definitely not they're overlooked often because we think about, okay, a conversation, it has to have a greeting, has to like, you have to comment this way on a thing. One thing that's sort of, maybe this is off topic, but one thing that frustrates me about the way that a lot of conversation is taught to like some of my like autistic kiddos, is that like they use these like formulas that are so funny to me, because it's like the way that like an adult thinks that a teen would talk or something like that. And even the way that they teach analogies and stuff like that, all of that language is so it feels so forced. And like, getting back to like, learning with input from a culture, like, the way that you talk should be and is influenced by who you are around, because that's like where you want to have shared cultural knowledge. So like, and shared, phrases and all that stuff is important to then be able to go off and make these knowledge explorations in conversational space. Yeah, sorry, this is going way out there.
You know what? No, but Garrett, it's so funny because how meta, you're like, oh, the best conversations diverge and it brings us to the edge. And you actually said, oh, I'm on the edge of what, the edge of what I know. So you're talking about what you are experiencing right now, which I don't know if you realized that was happening while you were doing it.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. It's also hard to have that meta like frame on while you're talking.
You're reminding me of, because as I was preparing for our conversation, I was thinking about the kids with whom I feel that feeling of like improv and jazz with them. And I explain it. I'm a reformed theater kid, so I'm always thinking about the theatrical nature of that back and forth. And I'll explain it to families about this really is very theatrical, but it reminds me of jazz improv as well. Who are the kids where I have that flow state where the exchange of information is really rich and there's a convergent aspect, but then where we like build and you feel that momentum and that flow. And I thought about some of my younger kids, but as you were speaking, I was thinking about a 13-year-old I work with where, teenager, early, like just hitting those teenage years. And we're not sitting there being like, okay, and then in this situation, you could say this, or here's a turn of phrase that let's go deeper into what that means. This kid and I are communicating through memes. We're having conversations with quotes from, do you remember Vine? The platform Vine? Yeah.
Sure.
Or we're communicating through like TikTok phrases. So like there's one that from years ago, I don't know if you remember this one where it's like, he needs some milk. Do you remember that one? It's very niche. Very niche.
Yeah. Might be too niche for me. But
too niche. Yeah. I'm very online, unfortunately. But, she came out and said that phrase. And I was like, I know exactly. Like, I was able to take that and run with it because of our shared cultural understanding of this one reference from being chronically online, both of us. And then I was able to run with that and that improvisation. I could have never planned for that utterance to come out. That's not something I would sit in grad school and be like, okay, like here's, it's because I was in the moment. It's because we had that shared culture understanding. And because of that feeling of yes, and I'm going to take what you say, I'm going to iterate upon it. And the look on her face was like, that quote. It's so fun. So we're communicating through these internet snippets, and language complexity has been able to grow through this container of shared knowledge.
Oh, yeah. So cool. Yeah. It reminds me of like when I'm playing, when you improv with people in jazz, sometimes you'll throw a quote in there, like you'll play the head, from another song that you like, cause like jazz musicians, they all kind of know that, like, they know that all the tunes in the real book or whatever. And so you like play a head from another song, and like, yeah, like, I got you. And like the
Yeah.
other person will respond. So I think there's both a beauty and a danger um, in this age that we're living in that like you can make that beautiful connection with somebody, and
Hmm.
yet the shared assumptions that we all have together become more fraught because
Mm.
like it is harder for me to connect with someone who is only on like TikTok, for example, like, a
Hmm.
lot of my kids,
Hmm.
because there's so much that they say that has no, like, it's not tied to something for me, like
Yeah.
in particular, like we've never been in this situation before, like because of society.
Hmm.
But I know in a lot of my kids, and it's not just like, and this becomes harder with some of my like autistic teens who are awesome, but like, struggling already with picking up on certain social patterns. So they're not like changing what they say based on like different types of people. So
Yeah.
they'll like say just, crazy stuff that it sounds crazy to me, but it's just because I don't have
Yes.
that very niche knowledge. And to get that niche knowledge is like almost impossible
Right. Yeah.
in the day and age. So like, I don't have an answer to this, but I like just,
Yeah.
I wonder like in good improv, like, in good jazz, people have that shared base. They have,
I see.
I mean, that's what language is, right? Language is culture's shared concepts that are
Yeah.
written in this code.
Yeah.
Um, and so to be able to connect with people and to be able to even communicate, we do need shared assumptions.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's awesome to have also the stuff that you can like really hyper connect with other people on, like, oh, I know what you're talking about.
Hmm.
Um, but like also we need to make sure that the cord doesn't break down
Yeah.
under that pressure.
Yeah, it's this passing on of that shared corpus of symbology, generation to generation. But I, hear commentary, people like think pieces of people saying we have less and less cultural touchstones. Think about like
Yes.
the more streaming platforms we have, all of these different social media platforms, there's so much more ways of recombining information, and you get smaller and smaller pockets of people connecting with that and sharing that. And so, with the lessened amount of cultural touchstones, exactly, you're less likely to know where a quote is coming from than maybe speech therapists in the 90s, where it was like, that's probably from Aladdin, or that's
Yeah.
probably from
Yeah.
this smaller
Right.
range. Something that has been helpful for this particular client has been actually teaching this kid the word gestalt. So like, oh, I just like acknowledging whatever that quote was. And I miss a lot of them because I'm not a Roblox person. I'm not a Minecraft person. I don't know what's happening there. I kind of don't want to know what's happening on there. But saying like, oh, where's that gestalt from? Where did you pull that from? So that she can then think about, where did this come from? What's the context? Kind of passing on that ability to interpret and that skill of interpretation to her. So then we can meet in the middle. And so for me, that was a realization just, within the last 6 months of, I should teach this kid what Gestalt means. I should teach this
Mhm.
kid what echolalia means. So then we can talk about it instead of it just being a category that I know or the parents know. Empowering the client at whatever age it makes sense to, of, hey, this is a communication pattern that you have. This is a way that you acquire meaning, and I can meet you there if you know how to analyze it with me.
Oh yeah, that's great. I could see that's like a way of building that bridge, like
Yeah.
that is being created by like, a lot of diverging interests and things like that. Like
Yeah.
you're now trying to create that bridge. And I think that more and more of that will be necessary,
Mm-hmm.
just to connect, right? Like, are
Yeah.
we gonna, yeah. Um, but I think maybe this is also a big point of like language is social, like it's
Mm-hmm.
for a social purpose. music, I think too, like evolutionarily speaking, like music is like for, we did it to connect with people. We did it to like get things done together. The entrainment ideas, obviously.
Yes.
So the idea of entrainment is that like, there's these interesting studies that have shown that when you are, bouncing rhythmically with somebody at the same time, you're like, you bonded with them a little bit more. Like there's this pro-social thing that happens afterwards. Have you seen the study with the I think it was like 14-month-olds that they bounced in time with the experimenter, and then they're more willing to like pick up things for the experimenter and stuff. So this thing is really, really deeply ingrained.
But I think for people who maybe if this is their first episode or they haven't learned about entrainment before, if we can talk a little bit more about what that is, maybe what we're looking for, and also maybe forms of that in adulthood, it might be easier to recognize that. Let's think of a couple places where that happens. So I think about like my dance class, we are in training at a pretty high level. Let me know if you think
concerts, and baseball games or something where they do the chant
or the wave.
The wave.
Yeah,
the wave.
Exactly.
Yeah, the wave is a good one.
When I think of when you're walking next to someone and your footsteps line up, you look down, you're like, oh, that's happening. It's also related to mirroring too, I think. So when you just click with someone, you're like, you just click. And you realize you might be mirroring their body. But there's two dimensions that I've read about with entrainment. There's the temporal entrainment, which is how we're syncing up, how our bodies are moving as time progresses. But then that affective entrainment that comes with it, which is we're entraining our affective experiences, the emotional presentation, but the internal emotional experience as well. And so like, I know from my dance class, I talk about my dance class a lot. It is like, it's my favorite thing. But I think about when the group, there might be like 40 women in the room all dancing. When we are doing a song where we all know the moves really well and we have that higher temporal entrainment, I'm looking around, the smiles are huge. The eye contact in the mirror goes up. So there's this relationship there. And that's what like the research shows as well. And exactly, you were referencing that pro-social effect. But I see it in this class of when our bodies, when we're synced up, the connection and the feeling in the room is through the roof. And so if we tie that back to our sessions, what can these ideas actually look like in what's the word? Oh my gosh, I'm having word finding. Whenever I get really excited. In practice. Thank you. When I get excited, my word finding goes out the window.
Oh man, me too. So for entrainment specifically, I think music, so I was saying that this isn't really about music as an intervention tool, but I think that one's like a perfect example of how you can like do a drum circle at the beginning of the session. I always, because I started out with speech therapy PD because they I was on one of their podcasts for talking about beatboxing as a speech and language intervention. So I mean that's a great way. Like you beatbox together. It's awesome. That's one thing. And so I think another way that this can be practical is like when we talked about input. So I guess that's sort of like practice context. You want to tie them together. And then input would be like, make sure that you give your children a lot of like good quality input where they're attending and they're getting the phrases, again, speech and language seem magical, but when we look at the research and like these early things that kids say, they're like all things that the parent has said to them because they're picking up the parent's language and what they're saying and what they're trying to say, and they're imitating that and copying that. That's their model. I might push back on with Gestalt processors though,
because so I think about for so many parents and it's not like full pushback. It's like hearing like, so if it's all coming from parents, we don't necessarily see that with these kids. Because I hear from families, they're like, okay, well, the doctor told us just talk all day, just talk normally, and it's not working. But my kid is acquiring language from Bluey, and they're picking up all of their language from these other sources where it's like the quality and the how of the input. I think about it's not just like the immersion in, it's being able to gain and acquire really rich input from sources that have certain acoustic qualities that might be amplified or leaned into. And I just like wanted to catch that one because I know there's a lot of parents who listen to this who might relate to being like, okay, well, I feel like I am giving a lot of really good, like rich linguistic input, but it's not sticking. But the timbre of your voice, kind of how are you using your instrument to help your kid's instrument become more fluent? And it's not necessarily in the beginning, it's not necessarily from the live vocal sources of like the people in your life. Sometimes it's coming from the rich intonation, the timbre, the elevated, like melodic and rhythmic elements of that cartoon character.
I see. Yeah. No, I think basically it's about attention and input. So it's stepping back, it doesn't necessarily have to be from the parent. I think the parent is like just what happened. Like the caregiver is like when you're an infant, like that's who's around. So that's where you're getting most of your input. But at like any input, and input also requires attention. So I think that's where maybe in this example, like you're saying, like these, like a lot of these cartoons and like Bluey, like they're really highly salient. Like they grab your attention, and so like you also need to. It's bidirectional. Like you need to attend to something in order for that to be processed. So especially for kids who kind of struggle with like sensory integration and like tuning out certain things and tuning in others. I think it's like that's probably the formula. It's like whatever you attend to. But I think sort of regardless, like input is something that you're like whatever your child is attending to is going to be something that they repeat and process and imitate. And so whatever that language is, it's important they do get language as input. And we're talking about social, like doing social groups or like teaching kids how to go through social situations. A lot of times, like as therapists, we go through the book and we use these particular phrases. Maybe it's like some like everyday speech videos, not calling them out or anything. I think their stuff is cool, but like if it's some video where they have two kids talking and they're like, just speaking in a kind of a campy way, like that is going to be what the kid is picking up. But like really, if they talk like that amongst their peers, like that might not be the best, most fitting way, because that's not how their peers are talking. So you actually want to get that input that's like in the cultural context that you're going to be living in. It's just like being a jazz musician. If you only ever listen to, I don't know, like country or something, or polka or whatever it is, like you're going to like not have the same. You're not going to have the same vocabulary. You're not going to be able to have a good conversation without that same input. So I think that's why input is quite important. Just like something to think about. But it's complicated. You're right. Like it's like, and it's not all parents' fault. I'm definitely not trying to blame parents for that. It's just like just the idea that input itself is like an important thing to consider.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to when I jumped in. You had just said the word attention, and I didn't jump off of that. It reminded me of 2 episodes ago. I interviewed Amy Zembrinsky about executive function.
Executive function.
Yes.
Yeah, I listened to that one.
Oh, you did?
Great episode. Yeah.
Because she was thinking of perception and attention. And I think maybe what I want to emphasize is that for parents, but also for therapists, there's a lot of therapists. That's why I wanted to start this whole podcast about Gestalt processing, because you have people saying, I'm giving really rich input. They don't care. And they don't even seem to hear me is the input that we're giving being perceived, being attended to, and if not, what are those modulations that we can do as communication partners that are going to be easier to perceive and going to be easier to attend to?
Because again, yeah, in order to like have a social connection with people, you have to be able to talk on a bunch of different wavelengths. And it's actually like remarkable. It's like crazy that we can do this. And it is, it becomes more obvious when it's like, yeah, of course it's difficult. Like I wouldn't expect everyone to be able to do this, but it becomes obvious with the kids we're working with. But they're once you do connect on that one wavelength, it's easier to like then kind of shift and move to different ones.
To build upon it. Yeah. So that's a common one of what is the rhythm of this child in front of me? Instead of I'm going to keep trying to connect it back to the analogies, right? Instead of saying like, hey kid, I want you to sing the songs that we're all singing. I want you to play the riffs that we're all playing, connecting with what rhythmically, what melodically are you already resonating with? What are you producing? Like, and how can I join you there first? And then over time, can that Venn diagram like really emerge? Like I don't know if I like Venn diagram, cut it out. But starting with kind of like your musical corpus and all the symbology you already have, joining you there and then stretching it outward, stretching those skills outward, rather than being like, here's the rule book, here's the book. Like I need to learn from, starting with what they're already doing and then stretching that outwards.
Yeah, totally. I think it has to be done that way.
That's what we've been seeing work, especially for, a certain like subset of kids, or where if you're always trying to start with syntax, start with certain forms of semantics, or even like the pragmatic applications that aren't going to resonate with them yet, kind of that top down, I just don't really see it landing. Whereas like the bottom up, I was just talking to a neurologic music therapist today about how in her work with autistic kids, especially with like the psychomotor differences, the motor output, motor timing differences that can be really challenging, her work is all about starting at the bottom, the relationship between that child's mind and their instrument. And a lot of the kids that come into her clinic, they've had more of the therapeutic experiences from that top down, and they're just hitting a wall. And then the families start to work with someone from her orientation. They're building those foundational skills related to movement, related to that social attunement and that cue reading between two people and the improvisation. And then they're seeing all these really amazing gains because the roots of the tree are like being watered rather than trying to start at the leaves.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It can be easy to think that it's all in the leaves,
Yeah. Well, we can see the leaves, right?
Because we can see it.
We can see the roots. We can't.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, it's so important to think about the whole system, like in the tree analogy.
But it's hard. It's hard to think about. There's so much. I think it can be overwhelming to think about this child's whole body, their mind, and then like the wider world, the wider context. It's a big task for a therapist to be able to think about all this, especially if they're not a musician too. If we're pulling from musicality, you're not a musician, that's a whole other vocabulary. Which is why I'm trying to like translate all of this into those practical applications for any listener. Is I think one of the main ones is definitely the entrainment piece of it, or increasing the attention and increasing this. I love that word saliency. That was fantastic. Increasing the saliency of the type of the bids that you're making for that child to attend to you. That's a big one. Mirroring, entrainment, increasing the saliency of what you're saying, and even how your body is oriented, the movements you're making. Those can help with the bottom up.
Yeah, totally.
What else do you think is important for people to know or think about when it comes to jazz, music, language? Is there anything that maybe is missing from this conversation, at least for today?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much. We covered so much ground. Like it was all, so many places I didn't expect to. Yeah. With jazz, I just think it's so fun. People should play. But like apart from that, I feel like the things that you learn from jazz can help you understand, how to help kids in learning how to speak, because a lot of those same learning principles like really, really carry over. And we were talking at the beginning, like, at first when I was thinking about it, it was really just like this broad analogy. But it's almost not even an analogy. It's really how, like when you pair two domains, like both are, really skill learning in this deep sense. And there are going to be things that you can see from like learning. Cause, I think the issue is that we don't understand and see in our, we don't watch the process of speech and language developing. When we're going through it, we just go through it. When we learn a new skill, we're usually like trying to get better at that skill consciously. And like, we're trying to figure out what to do. We're listening to teachers and all that. But when you go through that process of skill learning later, you start to break down, okay, here's actually some things that work. And here's things that might be ineffective. And it's like, it's so hard because I think a lot of these things are not well understood just broadly, and there's still contention like almost at every level of this. But
sure, yeah,
I think that it's still, when you go through the process of learning a new skill, like there's so much that you carry over, and I think it helps with understanding that kids should practice in context, and that context is like on all these various levels, like not just the phonetic context, but the word and the phrase, and the like you're saying, it's embodied and it's broadly in a social cultural context, but they're actually encoding all of that variation whenever they hear something, like something about that whole experience is going in there. And so it's important to recognize that as we teach, and we want to be able to teach things that can generalize and that aren't just like practicing scales over and over again, or like something like practicing, just one note, or like strengthening your fingers or something like that. We want to be able to maybe do some of that, but also like connecting it to like this thing that we're actually trying to do here, which is play music together.
Right. And like, if there are those like core challenges or deficits when it comes, like I think about kids who might have more complex bodies where strength is a challenge, like not throwing that completely away. Because if it truly is like a more like an important part of the picture, because like, PT or OT might come in and be like, no, we actually do have to work on that, but not throwing away the wider social context of language acquisition just to focus in on that. And so it's part of that wider picture. And I think when I think about mapping, that's another way I talk about it with families or other therapists is the input that you're giving mapping onto the social flow around that kid? Or are you giving something that's like in your head very logical of, oh, this is what I would say right now, but does that actually map or kind of like layer? I give the analogy of like, are we trying to hammer in the nail of a word, or are we trying to layer on a blanket of meaning onto what that kid is already experiencing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. You want to be able to like give meaning to the things that the child is experiencing, right? Like you want to be able to like make those dots connect, not just like kind of do something over in this other corner, in this other room that like doesn't connect to anything else that they do in the day. Yeah, for sure.
Or like even like looking at a kid getting into, because we're always wanting these kids to like entrain into or say the things that we would say. But I'll encourage people, I'm like, okay, if your kid could have a lyric for right now, what would it be? I'll talk about, I love analogies, but I'll say like, okay, if your kid, imagine that right now, what they're experiencing with us is a music video, what lyric would make perfect sense? And through that lens, I find people start to come up with really, really rich models. And the input they then give maps better to what that kid might be thinking, and they're acquiring it better. So it's like, okay, what is the music video my kid is in right now? What are they starring in? And what would the lyric be for this moment? And that little shift there, I see confidence go up for parents. It's more fun for them too. And you just get that spark in a kid's eye where they're like, yes, that is the lyric for right now. That works for me. Or maybe cool. Maybe riff if we're going to. I'm always thinking lyrics.
Lyrics is great. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that listening portion is so important for everybody, but being able to like, I think we come in so much as therapists and like, I have this agenda and like, I'm trying to like make this one thing happen. Like you're saying, like you want them to say what you want them to say, but like if you really, really listen, right, you're going to be able to tease out some different patterns that can make, and I think your job as a therapist is eventually to help your, like whatever kid you're working with, be able to play across any like musical style. But you're going to come in, they're going to have a musical style. And if you just play jazz with them, like, or like whatever it is, I don't know, metal or something like that, your kid might be playing like, I don't know, like Brazilian, like choro or something. And like if you don't recognize what they're playing, like you're never going to be able to get on the same page with them to then help them. Like, again, you want to connect and then be able to like draw them into different areas, right?
Yeah. It's like, okay, I'm going to like, it's kind of on me to, what was the genre you said? Brazilian what?
Choro. It's like
choro. Okay.
Choro is like a like more traditional Brazilian music form.
Oh, yeah. So like if we're saying like that's where your kid is operating. Okay, I love all these analogies. It's kind of on us to learn about that style first and get into that world and then iterate upon that and stretch outwards. Absolutely. Garrett, this was really, really cool. This might have been my favorite episode I've ever recorded. I'm glad that we did a lot of diverging because we ended up in cool places. But I think we touched on a bunch of core tenets and ideas. And what I also like about a lot of the episodes that I am doing is that talking to these guests, we give people really cool jumping off points. We give them definitions and terms and ideas where they can take it and go, okay, I want to learn more about that next. And I think that you provided a lot of those springboards and jumping off points for people.
Oh, this was super fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I think also people need to know about your podcast. So what is it? Where can they find it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I would love to have you on there too. We got to do another like crossover at some point.
We should, yeah.
But yeah, so I have a podcast too with speechtherapypd.com. So we're really speech therapy PD family. But yeah, so I have a podcast called Beyond Words, and it is, I think like I tend to go in the, like, maybe you could tell from the talking style, but I tend to go more like theoretical and like, I love talking about like, how we think that the brain processes language, how language is structured, and all these more deep questions. And I try and pull out from that what is relevant for therapists too, because I think all of that is actually really, really important. Like, how can we teach language development without really deeply understanding it? And, I think we can, but like we use these heuristics, like, behaviorism, for example, which has these edges that like, might not make sense in some contexts. So I'm trying to get a better understanding of really how all of these things work. And I'm trying to use that to like, even offer just like a different way of thinking about things. So that's a lot of what's going on. Also talking about music.
Yeah. I mean, you interview people, your episodes, you interview researchers, and I sit there and like, I try and take notes. And sometimes I have to listen like a couple times, not in a bad way, in a good way, because the richness of the interviews is like next level. You have some really amazing guests on there. And one more thing I'll say, because I never know how to stop talking, is that I think the level that you go to on your episodes of going into the theory and the why is really important for the kids who don't fit the mold. when you're working with kids who you're like, I don't see these kids like in the recommendations, everything that all the insight I'm getting from people, it's not working. What I find, if you can go back to the why and really understand the why, like the mechanics of the brain, not that anyone truly, understands it, but like there's, again, like you said, so much contention, so many ideas. But when you can backtrack to the potential why and the mechanisms of it, I found I get better ideas for that kid in front of me who might be on the edges of that bell curve. So thanks for the work you do.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind words. And yeah, I've just been so honored to be part of the podcast, and I would love to have you come on and like chat again, because this has been super fun.
Yeah, we got to do it. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Definitely go check out Garrett's podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Gestalt Get-Together. Thanks so much for joining us on today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We want you to get credit for the hard work you've put in to further your education. We also appreciate your support. We'd love for you to write a quick review of the podcast and subscribe. If you're listening on a streaming platform, feel free to rate us. 5 stars is great, 4 stars is awesome, but we also appreciate honesty around here if it's lower. That way, your ratings and your reviews will help get our podcast to more clinicians like you, as well as parents and people from other professions who might benefit from learning about Gestalt language processing. Now, if you've indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA for you. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. And also, please don't hesitate to tell us which topics you would like us to cover in future episodes. To get in touch, drop us a line in the comments section or send us a message on social media. We'd love to hear who you want us to interview, what topics are on your mind, and where you'd like us to investigate when it comes to the world of GLP. Okay, but here's the really cool part, especially because you listened all the way to the end. For our Gestalt Get-Together listeners, we actually have a special coupon code to receive $20 off any annual subscription to speechtherapypd.com. Head over there to get ASHA CEUs for listening to this podcast and all other episodes. My code is Gestalt20. You're going to put Gestalt in all caps, and that is GESTALT 20. I hope to see you at our next episode.